Good morning, church. Wherever you are, wherever you may be watching from, we're glad that you've joined with us. Let's worship together.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing Your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. You're rich in love and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing and draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing Your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore, forevermore. Oh, bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. Oh, bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never when darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide, and I am not a captive to lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
Good morning, church. Thankful as always to be with you, joining you online for this service today. Hey, I'm real excited today because we are beginning a new series that we're calling Church Back in the Habit. And I know that sounds really strange to talk about church and habit together, but let me just ask you, have you struggled with your habits this past year? Like as you think about the last 15 months since COVID began back in March of 2020, has your habits gotten all shuffled around? And before you ask that question, we do need to define what is a habit. What does it mean to develop a habit in our life? Well, let me just give you this definition. Habit is an acquired behavior pattern regularly followed until it has become almost involuntary. And as you know, habits can either be really good habits, so it's good to have positive habits in our life, but then we can also have these bad habits as well. And as I think about habits, this year has been a challenge when it comes to my habits. Like my habits have gotten all rearranged and challenged because COVID's just been crazy. And I want to ask you, are you with me on that? You know, some of our habits we've developed in the past 15 months, they've been good. We've had to shift in certain ways because of COVID, and some good habits have been developed because we've had to develop them. But then on the other hand, there's some good habits that have taken the back burner because we've just gotten out of the routine. And then there's even worse. There's a scenario where our good habits have been replaced by bad habits. And this has happened to me in one area. It's happened with my eating habits. As it relates to my eating habits, in the past 15 months, they've actually gone from not so good habits to worse to even worse habits as in these last 15 months. And let me tell you why this has happened to me in particular. Back when COVID first started and we were quarantined in our homes, my daughters, for something to do, they started taking on this hobby of baking things in the house. And they got some baking kits, and they began just to bake all these different sweets: cakes, cookies, muffins, biscuits, just sweet things in general. And in giving them something to do, they had this hobby going on. And of course, being a good dad, I need to support them in their hobby, right? And so as they were baking things, of course I was there to be a taste tester. I've got to help, you know. And then when they actually served the sweets and stuff, I was there to partake, as I should have been as a good dad. And then there's the other thing about leftovers. I don't want them to think that their stuff wasn't good, you know, with being lots of leftovers at the end. I want them to think that they were good enough to eat all of it. So I would actually clean up, and as I was cleaning up, eat the leftovers. I mean, I'm like that. I want to be a good dad. I want to help them to feel confident in their new endeavors. But, you know, as I think about this whole idea of taking in sweets, as they were taking on this hobby of baking things, the reality is that in our house there were sweets everywhere, and I was just eating them. I mean, I found them there and I was eating them. And in particular, I developed this habit of taking sweets and eating them in the evening before going to bed, like an hour before bed. I just would want to take some sweets in. And you know what's crazy is that this started almost a year ago. My daughters have moved on. They have given up the baking hobby as of right now. But this habit of eating something sweet before bedtime has continued in my life. And this is what I find myself doing in the evenings. I'm looking for some ice cream to eat, or I'm looking for a bowl of cereal. I know some of you are with me. You're eating Lucky Charms before going to bed. I'm with you. You know, I've even tried to actually make a trade out, make myself feel better. I want to eat a bowl of fruit. I mean, that's good for you, right? A bowl of fruit. The problem is that I'm not eating a bowl of fruit. I'm eating like 3 bowls of fruit. I'm putting honey on top of it, sometimes chocolate syrup. After a while, what's the use? I'm just finding myself just rummaging through the cupboards trying to find something sweet. And I really realized how much of a problem this was for me in developing this habit when I was challenged by some friends to actually start exercising and eating better. And one of the measures that I decided to take in this endeavor is to actually quit snacking at night. And man, this has been so tough for me. I've really had a hard time trying to develop a new habit away from this habit I've been developing for a year of eating these sweets before bed. For the past year, I have developed a behavior pattern that's almost become involuntary. That's what's happened with me eating before bedtime these sweets. And that's what a habit is. It's this routine that we develop into our life in which it becomes kind of almost an involuntary motion. And this is something I've learned about studying habits, is that normally it takes 2 months to develop a habit. Well, let's think about it. We've had 15 months of being in this COVID crazy world to develop certain habits, to create and change the habits that we have had. And I know that I'm not alone. As you're thinking about habits in your life, they have definitely, I'm sure, shifted in the year 2020 and the year 2021 for yourselves. So, you know, going back to this whole idea of the church in our series in talking about church back in the habit, what we really want to consider is how is our habits now as it relates to coming together as the church? How are we now challenged in this whole idea of coming together or coming back into in-person worship? Again, when it comes to the habits surrounding church, these last 15 months have really juggled our norms as it relates to the church. Again, just to recap, what's happened in this past 15 months. Before COVID, in March of 2020, at that point we had total access to coming to in-person services. I mean, that's what we knew. We were able to freely gather together in person with no restrictions. And then COVID happens and the total opposite takes place. Like, we went to total quarantine to where we could not meet together in person. Everything as relates to our services were totally remote, totally online services. And we had to do this. And we were still the church gathering in different spots, but we were totally online. And then we went to more of a hybrid approach as things continued on. And we still had our online services, but we went to in-person services. But in-person services has had its challenges, particularly when we first started out, dealing with masks and social distancing and having to do overflow rooms. All of that stuff created challenges and also created some barriers, I'm sure, in coming back together in in-person worship. But today, this is what I'm so excited about. Things are really beginning to open back up in a big way. I'm so excited that now we have our in-person services, and they're really moving back towards a pre-COVID standard. You know, with the vaccine now being readily available and many people taking the vaccine, and also low COVID numbers that are across the United States, we're not seeing as many cases anymore. It's really allowed for a safe environment for us to come back together with little to no restrictions. The truth is, in-person service is fully open. And that's so exciting to me to hear that, to hear me even say that. I'm excited that we now have this opportunity. Furthermore, just about a month ago, we went back to 2 services, to where now we can allow people to come and be a part of choosing between 2 services and the guarantee to experience a live service. In the past, we've only had 1 service, and there was the thought that you could come and have to go to the overflow room. Well, that has been taken out as well. Now everyone can experience a live service in the same room, worshiping together, and so that's really cool. And this goes back to say this, is that I am really excited about the fact that we are fully open and ready to come back together as the church. Now, I want to make this clear. I realize there are reasons for us for many people to continue to worship online and to stay with the online format. I mean, the timing for you still may not be right, and there are some legitimate concerns. Health concerns, other scenarios that would want to keep you away. It could be the type of job that you have that would keep you from attending, and all other practical purposes. Sometimes our jobs and our schedules keep us from meeting on a Sunday morning. So it's very viable that you will continue, or that you are watching us online for a very particular reason. And every person must make a decision that fits them best personally and considering the safety of their family. And I totally get this, and I respect that decision. You are a part of the family of God. You are a part of Common Ground Church. We're going to continue to offer our online services from here on out. And so this is always going to be a viable avenue to connect, to worship with us, so that you can continue to grow as a part of the Common Ground Church body. And I'm excited that we have that availability. But if you're in a position right now, if you're watching this today and you can have the opportunity, like you're in a position that you could possibly come back to an in-person worship, may I encourage you today very directly, this is just an encouragement, come back to gathering with us personally as the church. I'm just encouraging you in that. If you're in a position that you can come back, I'm just asking you to be a part of us in gathering together as the church. And if you've been holding back, or you have friends that are holding back because you just feel that there's this uneasiness because you haven't been back yet, and you think people are going to think something about that, or this uneasiness is keeping you from coming, don't let it. You know, we're all in the same position. People are coming back every week. You know, I was so excited last week that we had the highest return that we've had since COVID began. People are just coming back every day. And if you've been out of church, say you've even been out of church prior to COVID hitting, This is the best time to come back because everyone is returning back at the same time. We're all in this together. But as I say this, I realize that for some of you, making a decision to come back to in-person service may be difficult for you for one key reason. You just gotten out of the habit. And I get it. We've been in this weird place as it relates to in-person worship. And within the past 15 months, there has been ample time. Remember, it only takes 2 months to form a habit. We've had ample time to develop new routines as it relates to our worship endeavors. And I'm sure that there have been, within these new routines, things that are now competing with in-person worship. And in other words, maybe you've just gotten out of the habit. It's like my eating habits. They've been created for a while, and now it's hard to make a change. And I realize that for many of you, again, there's legitimate concerns. I realize that health and other factors may postpone you from live attendance for many reasons. But this is what I want to do in this series. We want to encourage you, if you're in a position to come back, to get back into the habit of gathering in in-person church. Thus the name, Church Back in the Habit. That's what we're naming this series. And the reason I'm really hitting this idea in a big way of coming back together as the church is because making the gathering of church a habit leads to actually other healthy habits related to our spiritual growth and faith in Christ. You see, getting in the habit of gathering as the church leads to these other habits that really uniquely happen as the gathered church. You know, it's one of these things that as we gather together, there are certain aspects of that help us to grow as in no other way in meeting separately. And so that's why it's so exciting that we come together as an in-person. I realize that worshiping the Lord or being in person is not necessary for us, but there are some unique advantages to coming together. Not to mention, in Hebrews chapter 10, the Bible shares with us that it's an expectation for us to actually meet together in person. Listen to what it says. The writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 10, 24 through 25, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, but giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. So what the writer of Hebrews is saying is, don't get into the habit of not gathering. Instead, get into the habit of gathering together as the church. Because the habit of gathering together as the church leads to other habits unique to us being together. So in this series, we're going to look at how gathering as the church leads to these certain essential habits of our faith. And in this series, we'll call these church habits. We're going to look at one church habit each week that we receive that actually is able to be built into our life by coming together as the church in person. So let's just look at the very first one this morning and why it's so important for us to gather together as the church. And here's a reason. Church habit number one. It builds and develops in us a habit of worship. One of the primary focuses and purposes of gathering together as the church is that we are to come together to worship God. You see, when we gather and have the opportunity to worship together, we are able to show our affection and love towards God, towards Jesus, our Savior and Lord. You see, worship is a way that we commune with God. It is a way that we build relationship with Him. I found this definition in worship. It's not my own, but I really like it. I'm going to share it with you this morning. This is what worship is. Worship is expressing our affection to God, focusing our attention on God, and surrendering our abilities and life for God. I think that's a great definition. That's what worship is. But the question is, why is it important that we gather to worship? Because obviously worship as believers is not something that we have to do in a certain place at a certain time. I mean, we can have a worshipful mindset at any place and any time. In fact, it is encouraged in Scripture that we have a lifestyle of worship, that it is a part of our daily flow of life. It shouldn't be something that we only do on Sunday mornings at a certain place. Worship is a lifestyle of affection. It's a lifestyle of attention. It's a lifestyle of surrendering to God. It's a discipline that we have in our life. But with that said, it's still important for us to gather as the church to worship, because gathering develops both accountability and encouragement in worshiping. And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why gathering together helps us to grow in our worship, helps us to grow the habit of worship. So let's look at the first reason. Worshiping together builds a habit of affection towards God. The reason why we should come together and worship together is that it builds a habit of affection towards God as we gather corporately as the church. So last month, we celebrated Mother's Day. You guys remember that, right? I also want to remind you, next Sunday is Father's Day. Guys, I have your back, right? We don't want people to forget that it's Father's Day just around the corner. And so on these special days, normally what happens is that we do things in order to show affection for these special people in our life. And we show affection by getting things like cards. We show affection by getting balloons or flowers. Maybe you bought a special gift for that special someone. Even referring to Mother's Day, thinking back to that, you maybe did all these things to show affection for your mother. Maybe even made that special dish. But most of us on these days, we do something for that special someone to show that we care. And I hope that that act of affection that you did during Mother's Day or any other of these special days, that it actually does just that it communicates that you care and that you love and that you appreciate this person. But you know, sometimes these acts of affection, sometimes they don't necessarily communicate affection in a way that this person grabs a hold of. Like sometimes when we give these things or do these things, we've got to make sure that that something actually means something to the other person. It's not just a token gesture, but it's something that we've actually put our thought in and knowing that it would connect with that person in a special way. There was some kind of sacrifice made. Like as I think about Stephanie, my wife, on Mother's Day, we did the balloon thing. We did flowers. We had some other items to make it special for her on Mother's Day. But you know, all those things were not necessarily the things that made her day special. It was more of us showing affection through other avenues. My wife loves notes. She loves it when we maybe get a card and we write out a note to her specifically. My wife loves it when we just spend time together. And so on Mother's Day, we went to the mountains and we did some hiking in nature and we talked to one another. These were viable ways that we showed that we wanted to make it personal for her. We sacrificed our time to make it very special for her, to show that, hey, we love you and we want to do these things for you to show our affection. And those are the things that connected with her. It was personal for her. And quite frankly, this is the way it is for all of us. We all want this personal type attention as it relates to showing affection to us. We want people to know that they care for us because they really know us in these special ways. And so with all this being said, I want you to see something as it relates to God and His love and affection towards us. I want you to see this as it relates to how important you are to God and how important the church is to God and how He wants to show affection towards us, how special of an act He gave us. Look at this. In Acts chapter 20, verse 28, Paul is giving his farewell address to the Ephesian church, and in saying goodbye, he encourages the elders of the Ephesian church to take care of the church, to take care of this special entity, the church. And listen to how the reason why he says we are to take care of the church. Look at what it says in Acts 20:28. He says, "Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God." So he mentions the church. Be shepherds of the church of God. Now look at why we are to do this. Because God bought it with His own blood. How much does God love the church? How personal is the church to God? It's so important. It's so personal to God that He bought the church with His own blood. He so wanted a relationship with me and you. He so wanted us to show His love for us that He died for us. His blood is our gift. We see this in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, where Paul says, "But God demonstrates His own love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Let me tell you how important the church is to Jesus Christ. The church is so important that Jesus gave His life for the church. Now, that is a love gift. That is showing affection. And this is why it's so important for us to gather together, because when we gather together as the church, it gives us the opportunity to magnify back to God our affection to Him. It is a symbol of gratitude for us to come back together as the church and to magnify our affection back to God as the gathered people. When we do, what's happening is it's a demonstration of the work of Christ, of the gift that He gave us on the cross. It's a demonstration of us being gathered together, that we have been saved by grace, and that we are a family of God worshiping out of gratitude for what He has done for us. Church is not possible. The gathering of the church is not possible without the blood of Jesus. And when we gather and worship, it's a picture of affection towards Him. It's a giving back of affection, of the affection that He shows us. And it's also a foreshadowing of how we will do this in heaven. You see, in heaven, we're going to be giving this affection and worship as well. The Apostle John in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9 through 10 records this vision that he saw of heaven. It's a worship service in heaven. It says this. He says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, and people, and language. They were standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God.'" I mean, they're shouting their affection to God. "Salvation belongs to you, God. You saved us. You brought us together into this worship so that we may magnify you." And it says, "Who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." They were celebrating Jesus because of what He had done to provide the opportunity for them to be together. And they were worshiping, showing Him affection. Worshiping together is a love gift that we can give to Jesus. When we gather to worship, we're taking the opportunity to say corporately, "Jesus, we love you." It gives us the opportunity to thank Jesus for saving us. It gives us the opportunity to thank Jesus for the eternal life that He has given us. We are given the opportunity to show victory, to be thankful for the victory that He has given us as in setting us free. And we also are able to thank Jesus for the family that we have in one another and coming together, and that He's developed this family for us. We magnify our affection to Him when we gather together. Christ died so that we can have the church, that we can have the gathering of worshiping Him together. Jesus gave His life for the church. So that's the first thing. We come together to have this habit of affection towards God, but here's something else that coming together does for us. Worshiping together builds a habit of attention toward God. King David said this in worshiping together, and coming together to worship. He says in Psalm 34, verse 3, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt His name together." Psalm 34, 3. And I love this. He's telling the people to come together to worship together. And I want to just talk a little bit about attention for a moment. Attention is hard these days. Would you agree? I mean, to have attention or to keep our attention is tough because there's so many things that get our distractions. Like, when was the last time that you went to a restaurant, and as you went to the restaurant, most of the restaurants these days, they have TVs, they have even devices on the tables, there's gaming that you can do at the table, and all these devices are a way to almost distract us. Now, normally when we go to a restaurant, we go to a restaurant for a couple of reasons. We go because we're hungry and we want to eat. But the other aspect is that we go to be with people. We normally go to build relationship with others, and that can mean related to our family members, or maybe we go to be with our spouse or work associates or friends. Whatever the case, many times we go to a restaurant to catch up with someone, and here's what can happen. We get distracted. Have you ever been in a situation where you've gone to a restaurant for that purpose, to catch up? But then there's something on TV on the wall behind that person, and it just takes your attention away. Or maybe your devices on the table, your phone, it takes your attention away from what you really came to do, to eat and to build relationship with the other person. I mean, that's why you came to catch up, to build relationship, but yet you got distracted, and it takes away from the purpose that you had intended to get together. And I mentioned that. It's so hard to keep our attention today. And would you admit that this happens with us, with our relationship with God? That when it comes to God, that our focus is so easily distracted from Him? I mean, when it comes to God, our primary focus and attention should be Him. Our primary focus when it comes to God should be to magnify Him above all else, to recognize Him as Lord over all. And when we say that we want to worship God, it's like we should make Him priority over everything in our life. But to be honest, I want you to be honest with me this morning. We know that this should be a part of our life, that He should get our full attention in every day of our life. Number one. But would you say that this week your attention has been taken off of God in some way? Has there been something this week, as you've progressed through the week, that has stole your attention, taking your eyes off of Him, and other pursuits has maybe been magnified above God this week? And you all of a sudden look up, you intended to start the week out totally focused on making sure God had priority. But as the week has gone by, you've realized that it's been days before even thinking about God, or that your focus has been totally taken off of Him, and you come to this point and you say, you know what? This week has not been a priority for God. This happens to us all. It's so easy because we get distracted. But this is why it's so important that we make our weekly gathering together in church a priority. Because when we weekly make this gathering a priority in our life, when we do this, we are submitting ourselves to the opportunity to refocus. It gives us the opportunity to turn off all the distractions and to give our full attention towards worshiping Him. We choose one day, one morning, every week that we say, God, this is yours. We're going to pay attention to you. We're going to refocus. We're going to bring our attention to rest solely on you. And when we do this, we're showing God, and we're also showing the rest of the community that's around us in Sarita and Tucson that He is important enough that we're willing to set aside everything else to give Him sole attention. And the gathering of God's people gives us the accountability to do that. When we gather, we actually spur one another along towards worship. Going back to King David in Psalm 34:3, when King David is worshiping God, he says, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me." He says, "And let us exalt His name together." I mean, David is saying this, do it with me. Let's give attention to Him together. And he's saying to do this because when we exalt God together, we are encouraged together. Going back to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 10, 24, chapter 10, verses 24 through 25. The writer of Hebrews says, "Let us consider how we can spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another." You see what happens when we come together and we spur each other along towards loving one another, ministering to one another. We spur one another along towards good deeds and staying focused on mission and service and keeping our priorities in life focused on the kingdom. And we encourage one another. We need each other. So worshiping together spurs us on to focus our lives towards God. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to gather as the church. Church habit number one, it creates in us a habit of worship. It helps us to build this essential habit of worshiping God in our life. And listen, I know if you stayed with me this morning, you caught this message this morning at home. And I'm thankful that you've had it, and I'm thankful that you stayed with me. And I'll say it one more time. I realize that there are reasons to catch worship from home as it relates to being an in-person at home, because in being at home, you may have a reason related to health or other reasons because of work schedule or whatever. And again, that's good. We want to respect decisions on that, and you are a part of Common Ground Church, and we will have this for you each and every week. But if you are in a position to where you say there's nothing keeping you away from coming back to in-person worship, I want to encourage you, come join us. Be a part of the gathering, because the gathering has benefits unique in and of itself to help us to grow other habits in our life that are so essential for our growth in spirituality in Jesus Christ. So come and join us if you have the opportunity to do so. Hey, next week we're going to continue with the whole church habit series by looking at another important thing that we do together in the church, and that's communion. And next week that is an important thing that we are able to do corporately. And next week I want to talk about the importance of communion. What does it really mean for us? We're going to dive deep into it and learn about this habit of communion. I hope that you'll be able to join us in that, whether it's through this avenue or in person. We're looking forward to worshiping with you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you next week.